All right, Paul Rosen, I'm going to take you back in time just a little bit, back to the year 2001, if that's okay with you. I want to talk about some notable news events from 2001. Now,
Do I have
9/11.
a choice? I mean, is that
No,
what you're saying?
no. In
Oh,
fact, you're going
okay,
to
all
go
right.
along with this as you should, and we'll get to the point
Right.
momentarily. So, 9/11 was the biggest and most catastrophic event of 2001. We'd rather forget about that one, maybe. But also in 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. That was another notable event. iTunes was released by Apple. That's pretty cool. That happened all the way back in 2001. Now, also in 2001, according to the Congressional Budget Office, it was the last year the United States federal government had a budget surplus. It was the last year to date that we had a balanced budget.
Wow.
More important to us than a balanced budget for our good health would be a hormonal imbalance.
Phew. Here, I thought you were going to start into a political show. Thank goodness. Woo. Not
Yeah,
interested. Thank you.
I veered right away from that one, and that one was kind of a stretch, I guess. But
Yeah,
that
it
was our
was.
intro to get to our topic for this morning, which is unbalanced hormones.
So you're
Or
you're suggesting that potentially some people might be hormonally bankrupt? Is that what you're saying?
that's exactly what I'm saying.
I
Yeah,
see.
you picked up on that very well, Paul. So we're going to be talking about this morning, among other topics. You have some other things on the list too, I think.
Yeah, both men and women can experience a shift in hormone production, causing an array of symptoms. Just a few are weight gain or inability to lose weight, irritability, blue moods, decreased libido. I mean, there's a ton of them. We can go through more. Is hormone replacement the answer? Or is there a safer, more root cause approach? And then, of course, we'll visit with one of my patients, Debbie, who was experiencing one or more of these. And we'll get into that, of course, later on in the show.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to define some terms first. But before we get to that, I want to remind everybody that you can participate in this show. Just write to Get Healthy at AccuNatural.com. Get Healthy at ACUNatural.com. Send Paul your questions and comments, and we'll address those on the air. And go to AccuNatural.com too. You can go there anytime, 24/7, for excellent health information. There are podcast editions of this show available at AccuNatural.com. And Paul, of course, is also on Facebook. You can get audio there and video, and also on YouTube. There's video available there. So you're all over the place, Paul. You are a very hip, happening modern guy. You
Hip,
are
hap,
social.
and hopeful.
There you go. You are social media friendly. So by defining terms, first, hormonal imbalance, does that mean exactly what it sounds like?
Means exactly what it sounds like. But the consequences of it, I think that many people may be less informed as they might be. And that's one of the things I want to go through. And in particular, I've focused on other glands that are affected by hormones and or produce hormones. And now we're going to talk mainly about the adrenal glands. I'm sure that people are familiar with adrenal fatigue, for example, but the consequences of adrenal fatigue, I'm sure most folks are not aware of. Did you know that as far as the number of hormones in the body is kind of a fun fact, there are over 50, and they're still turning some up, which is
Really,
pretty amazing.
we're still discovering as yet undiscovered hormones in our
Mm-hmm.
bodies.
And undiscovered relationships as well. And hormones essentially are substances, chemical substances that stimulate or depress function.
All right. So when things are out of balance, what does that mean exactly? Do we have too
Well,
much of?
it means that something's going to be overstimulated and or something's going to be understimulated, and all the connections with a various hormone or hormones will be affected.
Okay. So what would cause that overstimulation?
Aha. Jumping right into it, are you?
Well, of course,
I'm not going to take the bait.
you're not.
No.
You want to get to that in a more oblique way, perhaps?
Yes, adrenal glands. The adrenal gland has a cortex and a medulla. Now, this is just for fun.
Okay.
Um, and did you know, Rod, that the adrenal gland was the most vitamin C rich uh, place in the body?
No, I did not know that. So let me extrapolate from that and say that maybe do we need good amounts of vitamin C then in order to maintain the health of our adrenal
You
glands?
know what? It's why I keep you around.
It's why I get the big bucks, Paul.
That's right. That's why you get the big bucks.
That's right.
So, yeah. So, if there are vitamin C deficiencies, you will see signs, wait for it, of things like scurvy, very old, nutritionally driven condition. So things like skin issues, skin thinning, skin lesions um, can be associated with, of course, deficiencies of vitamin C.
Okay, so all of those things are important to good health, obviously, because we're establishing that if the adrenal glands aren't healthy, we're not healthy.
The pre-hormone, I'm going to get a little technical here, but just kind of follow me.
All right.
The pre-hormone pregnenolone, any of you who want to know what that is, you can look it up, is something which slowly uh, recedes production of in the body, and it is associated with the aging process, pregnenolone. And from pregnenolone comes things like DHEA and cortisol. You've heard of those two,
Yes, I have.
DHEA and cortisol.
But I wouldn't know necessarily the context for those. Those are just terms I've heard tossed out there,
Yeah,
so
so
I don't necessarily know, and maybe I'm learning right now exactly what those mean and why they're important.
so they're important because they're related to adrenal function. And they're also related to the ultimate production of testosterone and estrogen. I know you're familiar with those.
Yes, I am. Those I've heard of. So what I'm hearing is that all these elements are important to keep the adrenal glands healthy. Is that right?
Cortisol, the different types of zones. Um, People have heard of, for example, cortisone or prednisone injections for the for a chronic inflammatory condition.
Sure, I've heard of that. I've heard of taking cortisone
Right.
injections, but I wouldn't
The,
know necessarily the reason. I've heard of athletes doing that kind of thing, in fact.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The adrenal glands are the natural source of those.
So
Cortisol.
if the adrenal glands aren't producing them naturally, do we need to have these injections to make up for that deficit? Or better, would it be more healthy to make sure the adrenal glands are doing their jobs as efficiently as possible?
Ding, 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 ding,
There you
ding,
go. There you go.
ding.
Why take a
Oh
shot
my
when
gosh,
you
he
can make your
gets.
body produce the natural elements that you
Now,
need?
of course, where you have an acute trauma, an injection just might be the very thing to help with the inflammation and pain. But over an extended period of time, the use of things like prednisone imperil your bones, for example.
Back up a little bit, Paul. What would constitute an acute trauma? Would that be some kind of injury you sustain,
Well, you
or
said athletes.
there you go. So
So
there,
running, even though they're micro traumas, will affect, for example, the ankles and knees.
so specific joints of the body, which athletes, as a matter of course, put a lot of strain on, may have to be enhanced in their case by these injections.
It's football season. Imagine the injuries that the players are sustaining on a daily basis, let alone the game itself.
And I'm sure any athlete would tell you, especially a football player would tell you that the joints are probably the most vulnerable part of your body. It's the knees that often go first with
So the
athletes.
chronic use of cortisone or prednisone injections will ultimately create long-term chronic problems, right? So when you ask the question, if, say, you do a saliva, blood, or urine test to see, the levels of, say, cortisol or DHEA in the body and how that's going. If you decide to go with supplementation, hormone replacement therapy, you want to know all the potential consequences of that. And there are many.
Okay, could consequences be the same as side effects with taking medication? Is it a similar process? You
Well,
tell me.
they may be side effects, but also longer term hormonal imbalance effects,
So it's
which is,
not
of course,
just
what this show is all about.
right. So hormonal imbalance, our topic this morning on Health Matters with Paul Rosen. Get healthy at AccuNatural.com to speak to Paul directly. Get healthy at ACUNatural.com. Did my audio just drop out there, Paul? I heard
No.
a glitch in my headphones. We are on a Zoom chat, by the way, because we
Yeah,
are,
it's just the nature of the beast.
well, we are safe and socially distanced folks during the pandemic. So that's why the audio is touch and go now and then. But for the most
Yes,
part, it's
Rod and
every
I
bit.
have not been together in, oh my God.
Quite some time.
Oh, it's
One of
been
us is
many
weeping.
months.
One of us is weeping about that, and it's not me.
I beg your pardon.
It's okay.
I
It's
beg
it's
your
it's quite all right. So I'm guessing HRT or hormone replacement therapy isn't necessarily the best way to go for most of us. And clarify that for me, if you would, Paul. Why would anybody seek that kind of treatment?
Well, for example, let's say you have a hysterectomy. I mean, hormone replacements, at least in the beginning, may be the only thing between standing in between you and, some severe emotional, impact.
And you mentioned that particular instance,
But
a hysterectomy, but men and women can have hormonal imbalances. Is that right?
yes, but without such an event, yes, we want to make sure that people understand that the downsides of hormone replacement may often put you in danger of experiencing certain conditions that you may be scratching your head trying to figure out, why is this happening. I mentioned one, skin and conditions of all sorts, thinning of the skin. The other is the demineralization of bone and connective tissue. Think the need for knee or hip replacement, for example. Unexplained hair loss. I have any number of women come to me, very much concerned about unexplained hair loss. No laughing in the peanut gallery, as my face and hairline are probably quite clear in this broadcast.
Right, but that's not due to
Well,
a
some of it may
hormonal
be. I
imbalance.
mean, the impairment of adrenals is probably as rampant as the use of sugar in our country.
I think you could
And
tell
it
people all kinds of horrible things may happen to them as a result of
doesn't
HRT,
matter,
but the minute you mention hair loss, then you've got
right? It's like,
everybody's
oh
attention.
my
Right.
God.
Everybody perks right up to that.
The especially emotional. Oftentimes, people don't realize that their experience of themselves, the emotional experience of themselves, is often driven by hormone imbalance, and in particular, adrenals. So irritability, anxiety, or apprehension are all tied to both mild, moderate, and severe adrenal deficiencies. Appetite, indigestion, bowel impairments of various sorts, autoimmune conditions, lightheadedness that occurs, upon standing from a lying or sitting position, insomnia, craving for sweets, low blood pressure, palpitations, or heart arrhythmias. I mean, oh my gosh, poor memory, poor resistance to infections. The list goes on and on and on. And because people in general are overly stressed, and in particular now, right, you are affecting, causing the adrenal glands to be overworked, and in that the deficiencies begin to occur. Oftentimes people, of course, will wait for some symptom to knock them to the turf. Human nature, I guess. But the bottom line is, my educated experience would tell me there are very few people walking around right now in the United States that aren't experiencing some level of adrenal insufficiency.
And that's due to the stress we're under right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic, after all, and there are other stresses in the news right now, certainly. So the more kind of stress like that we're experiencing, is it the more likely that we'll have these issues? It is the more
Exactly
likely.
right.
Yeah,
And of
you're
course,
nodding your head.
what you're stressing is the fight or flight mechanism of the body, and the adrenal glands, respond accordingly. And so the need for cortisol is very critical. For example, to our stamina, our energy should be high in the morning and low in the evening. But at some point, if there's an overproduction, that's when things start to go bad.
So stress can happen to anybody at any age, obviously, but typically, Paul, more typically, are these things experienced by people of middle age? Or, I mean, can you have these issues at any age? I guess maybe I'm answering my own question by having referenced athletes earlier.
No,
Athletes are typically
have them.
younger
You
people.
can have them at any age, any age. I've seen children with insufficient adrenal function.
How horrible is that? Now, is this, and I know you always say that all things go back to DNA, but does this tend to be hereditary to a certain extent, or does it depend on lifestyle choices we're making, all of the above?
Well, I mean, in terms of the effect, everything is hereditary. But in terms of the environmental, impingement, the stress, the stressors, that of course depends on, the individual person's life experience. But the other important thing to note is that when the adrenal glands are insufficient, this also affects the sexual reproduction hormones, testosterone and estrogen. Interesting, huh?
It is, and that would be
So,
a,
so, so where, for example, a woman is finding it difficult to get pregnant, right? First and foremost, check the adrenals. Who would have thought, right?
well, I mean, typically, if couples are trying to have children, do they take that into consideration if they're having issues, if they're not cranking out the babies in the way they'd like to?
As a whole, I honestly, I can't say. I have not been, part of that process. I have helped some people who have not, been as fertile as they would like, or have not been able to conceive, and I have been a part of the process of helping them conceive. And adrenal glands are, in my experience, are always a player in that process.
So, to summarize, in order to achieve a proper hormonal balance, we first have to have good, healthy adrenal glands. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
And in
absolutely.
order to achieve that, we probably each have our own individual needs. You've mentioned a few standard things like we have to have
Everything
vitamin
is, yeah,
C.
everything is unique to each person. Yes.
So, any of the symptoms you've mentioned, like fatigue or irritability and those things, can be leavened by dietary choices.
Yes. Yeah, that can definitely help. But in addition, generally speaking, my experience is that food alone won't make it. You have to be enlightened to your unique circumstances, and of course that's where the nutrition response testing comes in, and where we identify the obstructions or environmental impingements that are preventing the reconstitution of a person's adrenal glands.
So,
And furthermore, you may remember we've talked about this many times. The adrenal glands don't live in a world of their own. If you have thyroid insufficiencies, you will have adrenal insufficiencies. If your heart is affected in a negative way, you'll have adrenal problems. If your liver is impacted in any way, you'll have adrenal problems. So it doesn't live in a world on its own. So you can't just take the adrenal glands by themselves and make all the little corrections and think, oh my gosh, I've got this covered. Doesn't work that way.
so in order to have a good, healthy, functioning thyroid and a great liver, do we take steps similar to those that we take to make sure that our adrenal glands are healthy? I mean, do the same
Absolutely.
processes work?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I
So,
might mention, you didn't ask me, which I thought you might, and that is what are some of the common causes of adrenal stress? I mean, the obvious ones, worry and anxiety,
sure,
right?
emotional stress.
Or experiencing a sudden loss of a loved one or job, or some physical function of some sort. Those are all fairly common. But a common sense, a common golly,
A common
a
stents.
common state, yeah, stents,
A
a
common
common
stents.
state of irritability or anger or depression will negatively impact the adrenal glands. Guilt will negatively impact over excessive exercise. Ah,
There you go.
right.
Now,
Going
there's
to
a
sleep, going to sleep, really late every day.
So pause on that over exercise thing for just a second, please,
Yeah,
Paul.
yeah,
You may have somebody, an athlete or somebody else who just considers himself or herself a really healthy person. Maybe they aren't feeling as well as they should, so they feel the solution would be more exercise. In some cases, would that be counterproductive?
absolutely. In fact, it's almost always counterproductive with respect to aerobic exercise. Usually, stretching and walking are not harmful, but where somebody's deciding to maintain their weightlifting regimen or their running regimen or that type of thing could definitely be contraindicated in the reconstituting adrenal glands.
Well, if somebody were, an individual who was proud of their fitness level, how could they determine how much fitness is too much?
Wouldn't it be nice to visit someone like me who actually has that experience? It's individual. It's totally individual. I mean, what I do generally is the people who do have adrenal issues and yet they still want to exercise, aggressively, I will check them on a weekly or biweekly basis. And if they're not making progress, then they can see it for themselves and they ultimately shut it down somewhat.
Boy,
It's
that
really
would
the
be
only way to, it's the only way to know. You can't do it
sure.
on your own.
Sure, I
There's
understand that.
not a
That
chance.
that might be a tough sell to somebody who's accustomed to working out a lot, that you have to actually back off a little bit and maybe get healthier that way, by actually maybe limiting your routine a little bit more than you have in the past.
And thus you have the human condition. That's
Wow, that was deep and
a
profound,
tough
wasn't it?
sell. I don't know. I mean, generally speaking, the sell for health, is self-generating. If
What
you
do you
know what
mean
I
by
mean.
that? No, I don't. Clarify that statement, please.
Well, when your system starts shutting down, then most people start getting the idea that maybe their health is something they should look into.
You're right. And I guess the whole point of this program and every other show you do is demonstrating that there are other ways to get there. And maybe the ways
Exactly,
we've tried in
exactly.
the past.
And although right, and although some may say, Rosen, you're uh, you know, sort of pushing a boulder uphill, I do my best.
No,
Try to
I
let
don't.
folks know.
I don't think you're pushing a boulder uphill at all. I think it's just trying
Oh, I
to.
do.
Okay, well, I guess you would be,
If I say stop eating sugar, that boulder I've been pushing for over 27 years, that one's made little progress.
well, fair enough. And sometimes the most obvious sell is the most difficult. Not eating sugar, I guess, would fit that
Yeah,
definition. Get healthy at
yeah.
AccuNatural.com. Get healthy at ACUnatural.com. Contact Paul Rosen there at any old time to ask your question about this topic or any other. AccuNatural.com is also an excellent source of health information 24/7. Hormonal imbalance is our topic this morning on Health Matters with Paul Rosen. And I pointed
The
at you,
other thing
Paul.
that people are often unaware of, and that is that a physical trauma, a bodily trauma, like say an automobile accident, can acutely cause adrenal injury.
So
And
I
and
don't
and
know.
there's no X-ray or MRI that will reveal that.
Sure. So maybe when we experience some kind of trauma like that, a serious or even a minor physical injury, maybe that's something in the future we should take into account.
Well, if you notice, for example, that you're having, some significant emotional ups and downs, or if you notice that all of a sudden you're more susceptible to, um, uh, chronic illness, or even the flu or anything like that, um, or overall weakness, or all of a sudden you're in a chronic state of brain fog, or those types of things. This is very real. I just had a patient who came in just yesterday, and it wasn't the adrenals, it was something else, but was clearly driven by multiple automobile accidents. So,
I'm sorry to hear that about your patient. Let me personalize this just a little bit, Paul. I normally, as we head into winter season, as a matter of course, I'll usually have one cold every winter. It just happens as a matter of routine. This
mm,
year, for all the obvious reasons, I don't want to get sick at all. I want to do everything I can to prevent that usual seasonal cold and therefore make myself less susceptible to something far worse. So maybe these are things I, as well as everybody else, should be considering right now. Making our adrenals healthy for one
oh,
thing, but
absolutely, absolutely,
overall
yeah.
health in general. And that includes, as you've indicated, maybe managing our stress as best we can. So we're not taking a physical toll on our bodies as we worry about everything going on in the world.
Well, you can't. Your immune system is not 100% if you have any, um, adrenal insufficiency, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. It's not. End of story. But you'll never know unless you get serious and start to take some steps to take care of yourself. So.
Well, a good place to start is AccuNatural.com and write to Paul directly at GetHealthy@AccuNatural.com, ACUNatural.com. Also look for Paul on Facebook and YouTube.
Yes, and my patient Debbie is a person who was experiencing, she said, ADHD and high blood pressure, weight control. She also had some thyroid issues, fatigue. She was concerned about certain vitamin deficiencies, um, and skin, chronic skin problem. Interesting, huh?
Yeah, as a matter of
So
fact. So hair
so
loss and
let's
skin
let's
problems, those are things that normally get our attention. So that's all the more reason to maybe be watching our adrenal glands or the health of those as well as we can. And obviously, Debbie had these kinds of issues, and you helped
yeah.
her find a better way.
Well, let's have folks sit back and have a nice sip of their lemonade and listen to Debbie talk about her adventure back to health. So how did you come to learn about nutrition response testing in the first place?
Well, like many of your other patients, I had been listening to you on the radio probably about a year on and off. And I finally decided to come in because I knew you had some comprehensive testing that I wasn't getting. And I just had kind of a list of issues that I was hoping you could help me with.
Like what? Give me the list.
Yeah, well, some of them were long-standing. Like I've been struggling with ADHD my whole life and had been on medication since the 90s when it was diagnosed. And so that was one of them. Recently, it's been high blood pressure and weight gain, and also, suspicious of adrenal issues, possibly thyroid, fatigue. I had been diagnosed by my primary care with having vitamin D deficiency and magnesium, and so I was suspicious of other vitamin deficiencies. And just a vague, just not feeling as well as I did, a few years ago. I have got a skin issue called seborrhea, and just a, general irritability that I wanted to see if I could address.
Well, that's quite a list. And you waited a year, so I have to ask the obvious question.
Mm-hmm.
Why, now that you know what you know,
yeah,
which we're going to get into, why did you take a year?
Well, for one thing, when I had my thyroid tested, I tested normal.
Ah, the old false negative.
Yeah, and
as you learned,
as I learned, and even though I had some obvious symptoms like hair loss and low body temperature, normal's 98.6, and I was always in the 96, 97 range.
Wow. I mean, what this points up, which is one of the points that I make on the show all the time, is that blood tests miss 90% of everything that is going on functionally with a human body. Now, I'm not saying this because I'm some, crank somewhere, as you have discovered. I'm saying this because I learned this from a medical doctor. In fact, I learned it from two medical doctors. Blood test. And you actually heard me say this how many times probably over the period of a year if you were listening, to the show on a consistent basis. Blood tests miss over 90% of everything that is going on functionally with the body. And so if you're suffering with some condition that you can, on your own, by the way, relate to an adrenal or a thyroid problem in this case, then you've got the thyroid problem. They're just not finding it. And you would agree with that now.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Which is really kind of cool. It shows that all of the frustration, it shows that, in fact, rather than having a doctor or a other practitioner offer you some sort of antidepressant because you're not getting well and you go and you say, well, geez, I'm kind of depressed. They ask you, well, why are you depressed? And you say, because I've got all these symptoms and they're telling me I'm perfectly healthy.
Right.
Who wouldn't be depressed? And it turns out that, in fact, you don't have a Prozac or a, other antidepressant or Xanax deficiency, right?
Right.
It turns out you have nutritional deficiencies,
Mm-hmm.
which you suspected all along.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. So you had this whole list of stuff. And at this stage of the game, I guess, and I'm not quite sure whether you answered it, but did you answer specifically why it took you a year?
I guess maybe just procrastination, the fact that I live in Oregon and you're in Washington, and I knew I'd have to travel.
Oh, my God. So you have to travel a little bit to actually address your major health concerns.
Well, and then plus I wanted to get off my ADHD medicine because it was getting too expensive, and even though it works at first a little bit, in time you become resistant to it, and I think that was it.
That's Debbie, Paul's patient at AccuNatural.com, or she's on Health Matters with Paul Rosen. AccuNatural.com is where you can find more information about these topics and many others. Let's just go to part 2 of Debbie's story, her road
Interesting.
to.
She mentioned adrenals. This is an older interview. I was nuts. I just happened to pick it, but it's pretty common.
Well, she's right. She's right on topic. She's
Part
right
2.
in tune with what we're doing. Okay, here's part 2.
The reason, of course, as you are learning, is because ADHD, ADD are all related to specifically the lack of function of your endocrine system and nothing else. ADD, ADHD is not a disease. It's not. It's a nutritional problem all the way. And I think you're starting to discover that. I'm sorry?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you're starting to discover that. For all of you people out there whose children are diagnosed with ADD and ADHD, it's an epidemic of epidemic proportion. And so many adults are being diagnosed with the same thing. But instead, it's all about nutrition. And you would agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Yeah. So you were taking taking some medications. What other medications were you taking for your, that whole list of things, your skin thing, your blood pressure thing?
Well, I have some cream, triamcinolone cream that I put on for this seborrhea. I was on medication for ADHD, and then later on I developed high blood pressure, so I was on medication for that as well.
Right. So here we have the perfect example of medication upon medication upon medication. And although they appear to be addressing different conditions, in fact, they are addressing the same condition, which is the nutritional deficiency and what you suspected all along, thyroid and adrenal issues.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
And you're learning that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, you finally came, and I don't recall, Debbie, but did you come to a talk? Had you?
No, I haven't. I came strictly due to the radio show.
Strictly due to the radio show. But would you recommend someone who wanted a gradient step into the process to come to a talk?
Oh, yes.
Why?
Well, that way you get to see the nutrition response testing demonstrated and ask questions, and it's all free.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, was the evaluation painful, by the way?
Oh, no.
Was it unusual?
A little bit.
Talk about it.
Well, you go in at first, and everything is explained to you. You test the overall heart, isn't that right, first?
Well, we actually do. I mean, we use muscle testing.
Mm-hmm. And muscle testing.
Right. We use the muscle testing, which essentially is testing the autonomic nervous system. And the way that I was explaining it yesterday in my talk, I think may make some sense here, too. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, what most people are familiar with acupuncture, and people really don't know how acupuncture works. But acupuncture accesses the autonomic nervous system, which means self-regulating. That part of your nervous system, which essentially is responsible for the management of all of the functions of your body. So if you have high blood pressure, there is something that is malfunctioning. If you have an ongoing skin problem, there is something that is malfunctioning. If you have ADD, ADHD, there is some part of your functional system that is malfunctioning. And the autonomic nervous system is largely responsible for managing the balance, making sure that things don't happen, okay? So what we're doing is that the body, the acupuncture system, is a series of points or areas on the body that are very much akin to sort of like windows into the energetics of every organ and every gland. It's almost like a battery on the surface. And if those batteries are nice and charged up, we don't find much. And if they're not, then we find something. And that's what we found for you.
That's Paul Rosen talking with his patient, Debbie, here on Health Matters with Paul Rosen. You got into acupuncture in that conversation a little bit, Paul. You are a licensed acupuncturist, is that right?
Yeah.
You say that hesitantly. So is that not
Yes,
something?
yes,
Is
yes,
that
that's
well?
totally correct.
Is that not necessarily a
I have so
treatment
many
that
licenses. It's kind of,
you have a wall full of licenses?
yeah.
But you were talking about the benefits of acupuncture there. I mean, does this relate specifically to our topic this morning, the imbalance
Oh my
of
gosh, Zoom
hormones?
just zoomed out there for whatever you just said.
It
So
just
you
zoomed
say,
out. Okay, I just pressed a button. I just pressed a button and
yes.
readjusted our Zoom screen a little bit.
Okay.
What I'm asking is that acupuncture in particular, does that relate to a hormonal imbalance? Is that particular condition, an imbalance of the hormones, something that could be treated with acupuncture, among other measures?
Could be, could be. Although my experience, is that without the nutritional component, you won't maximize whatever therapy we're doing. I love acupuncture, but as an acupuncturist, I recognize that the consistency of results was not as dramatic as I wanted it to be. I mean, back in the day, if as an acupuncturist you could help 70% of the people, that was batting pretty good. Now with nutrition, we're 95% and moving up. So, and then of course there's always the matter of resources. How much money do you want to throw into a project? And if somebody said to me, well, I'd like to, not spend so much on the nutrition would come out on top for me personally every time. The lifestyle changes.
There's cost efficiency, I suppose, and that is a factor for many. But it appears from what you're saying that nutrition anyway is your best bet, is improving what you eat.
Yep.
That's the way to get healthier.
Yep. And it's also the way to not just maximize the result, but to stabilize the result.
In other words,
what I mean by that is you'll find that people often go to an acupuncturist or chiropractor, on a regular basis to treat the same condition.
All right.
And having said that, let's go to part 3.
Here we go, part 3.
We did the testing. We used the muscle testing, and we found what was going on specifically with various parts of your body, various organs and glands, and we found that they were, in fact, in need of some support, were they not?
Yes.
And I essentially put a program in front of you, and that program involved changes in your diet, according to the testing, and changes in the sort of your habits, what you were doing in your supplements, adding some herbs and supplements. And so, was any of that a problem, and how did you experience that?
The hardest thing for me was breakfast, because I had been a big pancake, waffle, egg person, and when I found out the sensitivities to grains and eggs that were specific to me, I had to find a new way to eat breakfast.
Like so many of us.
Yeah.
Right? Because that is, generally speaking, the American breakfast. Right? Just go into anywhere. And that is the reason why so many people end up being functionally ill. It's why we have all the high blood pressure and high cholesterol and, high blood sugar levels, because that's the way people are eating. And most people don't even know that they have those food sensitivities. Did you?
No. I didn't think I was allergic to anything.
You thought you were just fine, other than the fact that you had this laundry list of issues. I'm just fine. I just have this whole laundry list. And by the way, they're all separate. There's this one for this and one for that and one for something else. Not. So the most challenging part of your program was beginning to change your dietary habits, and in particular breakfast. And I will tell you that is probably the single biggest question, most oft asked question that I get when people start on their programs is, now what do I eat for breakfast? Right?
Right.
So what do you eat for breakfast?
Well, I I read a lot of packages now, but I've been able to find some turkey sausage and chicken sausage that is all natural, no additives. And then I just have a fruit with it, or yogurt with fruit in it, piece of cheese with the sausage, and I'm good to go.
Good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Good to go. And my goodness, sausages and yogurt and things like that, all heart unhealthy foods. Oh my goodness. And the result?
Yeah, I'm.
Yeah. The result so far? Well, you've been on a program, what now, about 5-6 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
So the result so far, eating this horribly unheart healthy way?
Well, are you ready?
Go.
I've lost 14 pounds.
Ah! Oh my gosh! Oh no! Eating more saturated fat. You lost 14 pounds. Okay.
I can eat butter.
And you can eat butter.
Uh-huh.
Oh no!
And half in my coffee.
Oh, we're really headed into dangerous territory now.
And I'm off my high blood pressure med.
Wait, stop the presses. Stop the press. Wait a minute. You're telling me that you have stopped eating pancakes and French toast and cereals and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
All of the good heart healthy foods. Right?
Right.
You've stopped eating that.
Yeah.
And now you're eating high saturated foods and your blood pressure went down.
Right.
Would you please explain that to me?
I can't. and
well, fortunately for you, I can. And there were some other changes that you're experiencing. So you lost some weight already, and the blood pressure is now down in the normal range. And am I hearing without medication?
Right. I'm not taking it, and I do monitor it maybe every other night, and I'm still in the normal, the good range.
Without medication?
Without the meds.
Eating saturated foods, blood pressure down, lost 14 pounds.
And no more ADHD medicine either.
And no more ADHD medicine. And the symptoms for you of the ADHD, how are those going?
Anxiety mainly and depression. Couldn't handle stress. All way improved.
My goodness. Just with nutrition, right?
Right.
Just with nutrition. And that's my experience every single time with people who are willing to finally take control of their nutrition and make changes according to their own personalized nutritional healing programs. And you've seen that. You've seen my office.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Packed, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exciting or what?
Oh, beyond,
What's it worth?
It's worth its weight in gold, let me tell you.
There you go, Debbie, Paul's patient on Health Matters with Paul Rosen. She lost a bunch of weight, Paul. Is that necessarily a way to get healthier? I mean, if we're packing a few extra pounds and we take those pounds off, I mean, I would think that as a matter of course is going to help our general health.
Well, resistance to weight loss is always has a hormonal function to it. And it's often associated with insufficient adrenals, but also pituitary gland. Pituitary glands are, that's the major general of all of your hormone glands in the body.
All right.
That's always a part of the picture for someone who has tried to lose weight and can't.
If we get to it right now, Paul, we do have time for the last part of Debbie's story, her happy conclusion, as a matter of fact.
Is that it?
That's it. We've run through them all, so we have
only
time.
51 minutes.
Well, it's a pretty long segment. It's about a 5-minute segment, so that'll take us to a certain amount, and then we'll have time to add some critical additional information. By the way, so I suggest we hear the last part of Debbie's story, and then we'll come back with some stuff everybody's going to want to hear. So you tell me, Paul. You're the general.
I say doctors are bad people. Because they're not. And the overwhelming majority have their hearts in the right place.
What in the world is that?
I don't know. It's me talking very fast.
Here we go. Part 5 of Debbie's story.
not saying doctors are bad people, because they're not. And the overwhelming majority have their hearts in the right place. I am not a doctor basher. What I am is to try to, I'm a myth basher. I'm a basher of many of the current, sort of perpetuated nonsense ideas about health. It's drugs do not, poison does not make up for poor nutrition. And you would agree with that now.
I agree. There's a better way.
So what are the biggest surprises since you began your nutritional transformation?
Well, I guess it was how quickly I lost the weight and was able to get rid of the two medicines that I was on.
Yeah, that was
just astounded.
Yeah, that's totally true, and many people do experience that, but there are also others who don't, and I was one who didn't. It took time for me to see my symptoms begin to be alleviated. And when you come in, there is one phrase that I use: your symptoms may disappear long before the underlying causes of your condition are resolved. Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, and you buy into that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on was because you had just started and you saw such great results, but you also have a really solid head on your shoulders and recognize that if it took you 40 or 50 years to develop to this condition, right, that unlike the marketing hype of various drugs or even supplements or even herbs, you have to continue to be committed to address the underlying cause.
Oh, yeah. And I know I'm not finished.
Yeah, which is really kind of cool.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So are your efforts proving worthwhile toward achieving the
much so.
Talk about it just a little.
Well, part of it is you have to write down everything that you're eating, and I thought, how am I ever going to do this? But it's really not an issue.
Doesn't take that much time.
Doesn't take that much time.
And don't you think that being accountable, especially accountable to someone who, knows what they're doing and who won't let you slide, is that important?
Oh, it's very important, because then you're not going to regress back into old habits, and, you're very much the health coach.
Exactly. It's exactly right. Interesting you chose those words. And do you feel more empowered?
Oh, very much so.
How so?
Well, now I'm not going to hold myself back from maybe doing some things because the anxiety would get in the way, or I'm still not out of the woods with the fatigue area, but I know that I'm going to conquer that as well.
And how has your life changed in this first 4, 5, 6 weeks? I mean, how are you doing some things you weren't doing before, or contemplating doing some things you weren't doing before?
More in the contemplation, because I was holding myself back from even looking for a full-time job, and now I can, of course the economy's terrible, but at least now I'm not going to use health as my excuse for not looking.
Is that cool or what?
Yeah.
Because now you have the option. I mean, I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I got to work for a living. But I will tell you, when my health, sank into the sunset, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I enjoyed what I was doing. I just apparently didn't know how to do it as well as I do now. Has anybody noticed any changes in you at this point?
Oh, yes, especially the weight loss. And my son even noted that I wasn't as irritable or anxious.
And how does that change the family dynamics?
Well, it improves your relationships, let me tell you.
Yeah. I mean, you see everything starts to turn around,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is it cool or what?
Oh, yeah. And just that whole feeling of feeling calmer than you used to feel is, like the good old days.
What would you recommend to anybody else that you cared about? Friend, family member, people you work with?
Well, I would recommend that they go get tested and see where they're at, because you admit that if you can't help someone, you'll tell them.
Exactly. Thank you. But if I can, I also say nothing will help you as much.
Right.
Yeah. And that, I mean, is there anything that I said to you that hasn't been true?
No.
Yeah, yeah. So, one last thing, you would say what?
Go get tested.
And that's the perfect concluding note right there for your chat with your patient, Debbie. Get healthy at AccuNatural.com. Get healthy at ACUNatural.com. Communicate with Paul at 24/7 at that address. AccuNatural.com, the website, is also available anytime. Paul's also on Facebook and YouTube. And we've been discussing hormonal imbalance today on Health Matters with Paul Rosen. So,
Specifically
Paul,
adrenals.
and have we covered the
Specifically
topic thoroughly,
Yeah.
you think? The adrenal glands in
Oh, I
particular.
think so. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's a ton I could talk about, but we want to keep the message very clear. Look, folks, if you have any of the symptoms that I mentioned earlier in the show, then you can bet that your adrenals are part of it. And if you, you know, I don't know if I mentioned, you know, what nutritionally, what could you do in general? Where can you get the raw material to make the hormones, or at least allow the adrenals to make the hormones that are essential to a healthy quality of life? Fat is where this stuff comes from. So avocados and coconut oil and olive oil and butter and you know, might be flaxseed oil if you can get a really good source. All organic, by the way. These are where the raw materials come from, so that the body can make the hormones in the first place.
So, Paul, I think in conclusion, then, I can speak for many in saying that if you're saying that fat will help us be healthier, that's good news indeed. And maybe that's a perfect note on which to end, because I, as a steak eater, am all about consuming fat. There's that. Paul, what's on the show next week?
There's no better time to tame the two highs: too high cholesterol, too high blood pressure, and too high blood sugar. Would you like to learn how? Plus, it's time to use your power of the purse to send a message to the GMA. Who are they? All coming up this week. And remember, folks, you ate your way to your illness, and you can eat your way to wellness. It's the food, folks, so keep yours fresh.